All right, we are live for the Expo launch party AMA, closing out launch week with a bang. We've got John and Tomasz and Brent here, and our Brent. How's it going? How's it going? Everybody's doing good. We were just talking about deploying on Fridays, right? I'd be curious in the chat. Who feels comfortable deploying on Friday and who doesn't? As we discussed, Brent, you clearly feel comfortable deploying not only on Friday, but like a minute before you demo something.
Right. Yeah.
You see that focus look on
we
his
just
face?
bumped. Yeah, we're in the process of doing it right now. Actually, we just bumped into React Native 76.3. So yeah.
This is less of a live stream and more of a, hey, everybody, come join us while we go.
I trust in the process that got us here. I trust in our tests. I trust in the other people's tests.
It's a lot of faith.
Yeah, I guess we'll see. We'll see how much that trust is deserved.
I'm personally historically a little queasy about deploying on Thursday or Wednesday or Monday because it's kind of early in the week and then everybody will just like bug you all week about it if it goes wrong. I guess I'm just uncomfortable with deploying. Oh, Cedric's asking, did you test Windows? I bet Brent did not test Windows before deploying.
I think Microsoft did, so we should be good.
Excellent. Yeah, let's see what else. So we should get started here in just a minute. We're just letting folks roll in. You are watching the penultimate live stream of the Expo launch party week, the AMA. We have several conversation starters, but we're looking forward to your questions in the moment and as we talk about whatever we're talking about. And also if you have other questions, surprise us. AMA implies anything, I guess, right? I mean, within, it's probably like Expo React Native stuff we want to talk about. If you want to talk to me about like Major League Baseball award season, you could, but I don't know how relevant that is to everybody else. Or basketball's a big thing now.
Crickets.
Is hockey happening now?
I
don't know how
what we do in the shadows, latest season. Last one, we had a bit about March Madness. A little bit, maybe off schedule from the time of the year. But yeah, any fans of what we do in the shadows around here? Probably more than baseball fans, anyways.
Wait, what is this? What did you call it?
What we do in the shadows, the show. It's like a mockumentary thing about vampires living in modern day Staten Island.
Oh my gosh, I have to see this.
Baseball?
It's related to basketball in that the most recent episode was about their neighbor going insane over March Madness, and they thought he was possessed by a demon because they're vampires. And so.
Oh my gosh, I have to watch this. Well, we should get started with the live stream, though. I'm kind of distracted now because I need to watch this show. So I hope I can keep focus here on the topic at hand, which is the Expo AMA, the end of launch week. Thanks everyone for joining us, our launch party week. It's a party that lasts a whole week, and we launched a bunch of stuff. We had workflows, which we're going to talk about in a moment with John. We had a demonstration of Live Store in Expo. We had environment variables this morning. We were showing what did Evan do? Server component, DOM component, combined live coding just before the SpaceX launch. So a lot of stuff showed up. I'm sure I've just missed some stuff too, but we're going to talk about all of it and more, and we're going to take your questions. Just start asking questions. We have some conversation starters here, and we'll be taking questions all throughout. But if you have other questions about other things too, or things we didn't talk about, please post them in the chat and we'll get to them. So yeah, I guess let's get started here. We got Tomasz, John, and Brent who've all been launching and demonstrating various things all week. And we're going to start today talking about workflows. So John, what the heck are workflows?
Yeah, let me take it away there. And also, thanks everybody for coming. Expo-vember. Thanks, JP. That's awesome. Yeah, welcome Andrew, other people. A lot of the Expo teams in the chat too. So feel free to ask questions as we go. Great. So I want to talk about workflows. We announced this earlier this week, and we've been thinking about this for, I don't know, at least half of this year at this point. Pretty much like people just want to do more and more with the services we have, and they keep on doing that, but in like complicated, difficult ways. I heard a lot of people are using like GitHub Actions to like do TSC and lint, and then to run stuff like unit tests. Then after all that, they run EAS build, and then they wait on our servers and they wait for a webhook to come back, and they're running GitHub Actions. They're also running ours at the same time. You're paying for both, and you have to like make sure everything communicates correctly. It just gets complicated. So we're like, we think we can make this easier. We also had some pretty good signal too. If you've used EAS build, we've got this -- auto submit flag, which like people love. It just submits your build right after it's done. And to me, that is like the OG workflow. Like that was one of the ones where it's like, oh, this is cool. People want to do things in sequence. So anyway, you probably get it. It's a CI/CD. And I want to show you an interesting one I've been working on. That I just got working this week, I think, in a stable way. And this one is called Fingerprint. Okay, so to set the stage, kind of how this works is that your native app has its own runtime. And if you add native libraries, you've got to make a new development build in order to be able to preview updates on it and to be able to develop on it too. The problem is sometimes it's difficult to know if you've updated the native runtime, or you just forget to update it, and then other people try to run updates on it and they don't work because the native runtime is incompatible. We want to make this something that like you just don't have to think about, because like if you're like, what's the fingerprint of the runtime, and what's the fingerprint of the runtime of the update, and what's my app version, and like all of these other versions, it just becomes a mess of bookkeeping. And we think we can kind of make it all work for the most part for most people all the time. So that's what this workflow strives to do. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so I can show you exactly what this looks like. One moment here. Let me get the stream out of there. And here it is. All right, cool. So this is one example of a workflow file. I've got a name up here. This one's called Fingerprint. I've currently got the trigger of this one to trigger on every single branch. So I'm using this star glob. But the important part is down here in the jobs. So the first thing we want to run is a fingerprint. And this is going to take a hash of all of the native dependencies of my app. And how this works is I've got this job here, and we'll probably make this a little easier to in the future to actually do, but this is what it looks like right now. The main part of it is that it's going to check out my repo, install the node modules. Then we're going to install JQ just to be able to access something on a JSON object. Later in this last step. And then the last part is it's going to run npx expo updates fingerprint generate platform iOS. This is the thing that's actually going to take a fingerprint of my native runtime. Once I've got that, I can use JQ to get the hash of it. And then I can set that in a variable called fingerprint hash. This gets outputted and then also gets output from this job. And since it's outputted from this job, I can use it easily in subsequent jobs. And that's exactly what we do. So we take the fingerprint of the project. So we've got the native runtime. Now we can run get build. And so I've got this job here called type get build. You might notice that like instead of having steps here with a bunch of uses and runs, it's just a type. This is something we call the pre-packaged job. It's one that we maintain, and it's kind of like syntactic sugar that helps you get stuff done faster. So what this job takes is it can take a variety of params, but one of them is a fingerprint hash. And so here I'm saying it needs the fingerprint job, which is here. It needs the fingerprint hash output, which we set here. And then it's going to go see, are there any existing builds with this fingerprint hash? And in the next job, I can say, okay, after get build runs, I can say if that build output is, if the build output is there, then don't do anything, and this will evaluate to falsy, and it will continue, and it will skip this build iOS job. But if the build ID is not there, it's going to evaluate to this truthy value, and then it's going to run a build for me. And I've got this one set here to make an iOS build with my development profile. So it's going to make a new development build. Then this publish update job down here runs after the build iOS job, no matter what. One thing that we added that I actually think is kind of cool is we've got this after key. So I think if you're using something like GitHub Actions, you can say like to run a job after another job, but there isn't this after key. You have to use like a function called like success to make sure that you'll actually check for a condition, and it gets a little complicated there. We just have this after key. So no matter what happens with build iOS, I've got it such that this publish update is going to run just because I always want an update, even if I've made a build as well, so that it's easy to preview changes for my team. You could imagine that like after you've published this update, you could make another job that is like, I don't know, like notify like my team after this, and then it could do, I don't know, something like this. Cursor thinks this is right. This actually might be pretty close. I don't think this is actually right, but you can imagine you could do something right like that right after this. Okay, so if I want to run this, one way I could do it is just by pushing a commit here, but my favorite way recently to do this is to use EAS. So I can use the CLI to do EAS workflow, and then you can say run, and then you can specify the workflow you'd like to run, and it lets you run it right from your command line. I'll go ahead and do that. And it's going to compress everything. This is my coffee app. It helps you make pour over coffee. It's got a bunch of like little movies and GIFs in it, so I've got to upload some things here. Okay, once it does that, it's uploaded everything, and now I can see it running on our servers. This is kind of cool because you can test things out with the actual environment variables that they'll be running with in the cloud. So let's pop over here. This is my workflows list page. I can already see that this fingerprint is already running. And if I click in here, I can see that the fingerprint job is about to kick off. It's in progress. Right now it's pending, so we're gonna go and give it a worker. Now, so that we don't have to wait for like 5 to 10 minutes to actually see this all happen, I'm gonna go ahead and kind of like in a cooking show you like one that I've already cooked in the oven. So the first one I wanna show is this one. So I did this last night. I changed the runtime version of my app, and we can see what happened here. So my fingerprint ran, here's all the logs. It's gonna set the like fingerprint variables. And if I click in this drawer, I can see like this is the fingerprint hash that it created. So that's the representation of my native runtime. Then we've got that get build step, which is here. And it did not find a build, so it has no outputs here. And because of that, it ended up making my internal distribution build, which is my development build. And then finally it published the update here. So that's great. Okay, so then I immediately went and made another one of these workflows. So it has the exact same runtime. And here's what it looked like. Similarly, ran the fingerprint. You can see here's the fingerprint. It's the same as last time. So that's exactly what we were expecting to see. This get build here actually found the build from the last run. So that's great. And that means this build job didn't run, and then it just published the update. And this one was a lot faster. So that's kind of like one thing that you can do with workflows. There's a lot of things you can do. Coming back here, there's like, you can do TSC and lint now. You can like do a bunch of different sequencing things, like run parallel jobs that depend on each other and have different branches. You can go and make that build and auto submit thing that I was talking about earlier with a job sort of like this. We also support like building Android and then running Maestro tests, etc. And this is kind of like what that would look like. So yeah, if there's any examples that you'd want to see with workflows, or you're just curious about how it works, let me know. It's currently in preview. And so we're still working on making some of this stuff better. Like you said, like like I said earlier, we're hoping to make this a little faster and a little easier. But yeah, I don't know. So that's kind of a demo of how it works.
Wow, that was really cool. I like love how I'm not very good at like CI/CD. To me, like a few years ago, CI/CD was like me running a bunch of like, you know, bash scripts on another computer. I was like, if I could get off my computer, that's great. I just love how it describes in code like what you just described. Like we've all been doing these like workflows, and like EAS has like supported these kind of like mini workflows based on these like combinations of things like build and submit. And now we have the glue to put it all together and really to rearrange it in whatever way you need. Really cool. We have some questions in here that I think are relevant. I feel like Benjamin's question, I think you just showed it because that was basically the workflow that checks if you need a build or you just need an update and does it. I guess the only difference is that the launch criteria could be different. But we have like GitHub integration too that kind of goes with this, right? And we've already have some examples where we've been invoking builds with GitHub, our GitHub app integration. But I believe I read that this like works with that you could use various, GitHub conditions to trigger a workflow.
Yeah, there are two different triggers that we support right now. One is pushing to branches, and then you can define which branches, including globs. Then we also have PR creation to answer Ben's question. That's in our docs. If you go to the guide section under EAS, you can see like what that trigger looks like. So yeah, it kicks off on a GitHub PR. Let's see. And then for comments on a GitHub PR, that's something I need to come up with an example with. That's definitely possible. I just don't have an example handy right now. Yeah. One thing I'm actually working on is like a workflow create command that would have some templates like this. So you get some examples and yeah, that'd be a really good one. So maybe we can work on that.
Neat. Yeah. I feel like this is one of those features like, you just dive into like the recipes that are out there or these examples, and then you start rearranging all the Legos. It's like when you like, dump all the blocks out of the box and decide to build something else, which is fun. JP had a question just about fingerprint and recommending using it. Now I know like fingerprint is designed, of course, to be conservative and to like err on the side that there may be a native change that would break an update. I kind of going into his question, like I might have missed a part in the middle as you're going through it, but it looked like the fingerprint you were generating as part of the workflow was like getting directly injected to the runtime version. Like it wasn't trying to like recalculate it in the build. Is that correct?
So the build does recalculate it. Every build that we make will make a fingerprint and it will save it. And that's how we know, like, if I make a fingerprint of my project, like just currently on my computer right now, I can print. He's really excited about fingerprint. So if I make a fingerprint on my computer right now, just locally, I should be able to compare it to what is on our server. This is a little more solid than doing that because the fingerprint generation happens on our server, and then the build also happens on our server. So those fingerprints should be pretty solid. Although, I don't know, I feel like nothing in programming is ever like 100% it's going to work all the time in exactly the correct ways in every situation. Like that feels weird to say.
That's a good distinction there. And that was like probably the way I should have asked it, was that like sometimes folks generated a fingerprint locally and they saw a difference because fingerprint is generating it's processing your dynamic config, for instance. So if you have an environment variable that affects your dynamic config, say changing it from like a dev to a production build or changing the name of the app or, doing something to a config plugin or whatever, that could affect the output of the fingerprint. So running it in a consistent place where you're kind of starting from a clean slate, the environment variables are going to be that environment that you're sending to EAS, which we'll be talking about a much cleaner way to consistently send all the environment variables you want per production, preview, test instance, whatever. We'll be talking about that a little bit later, but having that consistent place, and also just the transparency, like you can output this as part of the workflow. Like you can echo things in there, so you can add some diagnostics to try to figure out your workflow and really get exactly what you want. Awesome. Do we have any more questions about workflows? Oh, I just saw another one. That's not a workflow related question. I thought Andrew's question, I don't think we could comment on it exactly, but the more things that you can see happening on their own in, on EAS makes me think about like, oh, how cool it is to like open your phone and see your workflows running autonomously, which of course you can do on the website today. But yeah, it's like, it makes me excited for the future about there's more things that are just like, I'm writing code and then things are happening. And they're all the things that are on the way to deployment and test. and I can go straight from code to knowing my code works to knowing my code is on the App Store or published as an update. And all I did was commit something to a branch.
Yeah, and one thing that Andrew said just a little bit ago, it would be super cool if there was an Expo update switcher UI for ad hoc builds. This would allow testers to have an ad hoc build installed and easily switch between updates as they test branches. This does exist. So if you have a development build, if you go into the launcher screen of it, there is like the middle tab, and that allows you to see all of the published branches. And then you can just tap on whichever branch you'd like. So if I'm on like, I don't know, PR123, all of my testers would be able to see PR123 and just tap on whichever update is there. One really cool thing about it is you don't only see the latest update for that branch, but you see all of the updates that have ever been published. So if you publish an update on every single commit, people can actually like go and bisect those by looking at the app between each one. It's not automated, but you can do it like in your head. And so it's kind of a nice way to like find errors, especially if someone just committed something, you're like, wait a minute, that's a regression. You can go back and see like, was it a regression before?
Awesome. Yeah, we don't talk about the middle tab enough, but there's some pretty cool stuff going on there.
I forget what it's called. Is it still called extensions, or it might be called updates now? I forget. Brent's like, we haven't updated it yet.
Whatever it is in the middle. All right. So I think we're going to talk more about, I feel like environment variables are the perfect segue from workflows, because we're talking about environments and doing complex things with your apps. This one's like very special to me. I've gotten a lot of questions about environment variables. We have had, for a long time, this system that was between like EAS JSON, defining your variables there, or using EAS secrets so you could store a sensitive value in the cloud. And the primary goal of that was to get your environment variables to another environment, to the EAS build environment, so you could actually set these things, these configuration pieces that you might have if you were setting up your own build server, have those available on EAS build. Of course, as soon as we have that, and as people's apps are getting, the more complex the apps that you're building with Expo, you need multiple environments. You need tests or preview development environments, and you need those environments to go in more places. Like you need them to go where you publish updates, because what your local environment is when you publish an update can be different. So I'm really excited that we have this new feature to not just store your environment variables in EAS, but store them per environment and sync them to wherever you need your environment variables, wherever you're building, wherever you're publishing updates, etc. So Brent's going to tell us a little bit more about the details and how that works.
Yeah, let me share my screen. And I'll get rid of this guy here. We don't need to see our StreamYard window. All right, cool. All right, so some of you might have read this blog post by Caddy quite a while ago now, but it kind of outlined how to use environment variables in various contexts with Expo and EAS. And the goal here was kind of outlining the way that things worked at that moment and providing a clear description for people for how to do things that were maybe not ideal. And like we knew they weren't the ideal way to do things. There's a section here on like synchronizing environment variables between ES Update and ES Build. And I'm sure if any of you have used both of these services, you've been kind of confused about how you define an environment variable in your build profile, and then you have to separately populate that environment variable when you publish an update. And similarly, if you define something in like a secret, the kind of relationship between that and what's in your environment in your build profile is like not always entirely clear upfront. So we hinted here that we were working on something, and it took a little bit longer than expected, but this is where we ended up. And I can demo a few things about this for you so you can kind of see what it'll do for us and kind of how it interacts with some of our existing stuff. So I have this little thing here. Hopefully we can read this. Let me just make it a little bit easier for people to read.
I don't want to break your flow. Oh, here you go. Thank you. For giving us some zoom there. Perfect.
Okay. Oh, it looks like I'm running this in another window. Let's just close that and run it here. So I'm just going to launch it on iOS. And we can see here, I'm just outputting the value of expo process env expo public example. If it's not there, then I put undefined. So something that people are probably already familiar with here is if we just add a .env, and then inside our .env put like this, and then reload the app. Right now that's defined, which is quite nice. Like this was one feature that we added with our built-in support for environment variables in Expo CLI that was an improvement over solutions like Babel transforms to inline environment variables. Is in many cases, they would require you, if you change a value, to basically close your bundler and clear your Babel cache and then reopen it, whereas you can just update it whenever. So that's great. That's a nice feature here. But now there's kind of a question of like, okay, I have this defined locally. How do I get this working on ESBuild? So one way you would have done this before is maybe in production, you would add this and you would have your M defined here, and then that's all good. Now, when you want to run ES update, how do you do that? Well, you need to make sure it's defined here. So either you're committing your .env to your repo, which I don't know, usually that's not a good practice and you want to commit a .env.example instead. Or you're just like recreating it all the time. But this is just like pretty manual and like we have to duplicate these in multiple places. So let's just try something out here. Let's delete this .env. And I'm just going to run ES update. And this will publish an update here. So we can pop in here. And open up Expo Go. So while that's running, so it's done actually, so I won't do anything else. But what we're essentially doing is we're publishing this update without any environment variables. So we're going to expect that when we open it, what we're going to see is essentially just the same thing that we saw before we set any value in .env. So there'll be like a undefined set here. So let's fix that in a way where we have something that works without needing to duplicate an ES-JSON and also works for update. So I'm just going to go over to configuration, environment variables, and here are some global values that were defined. So just click here. So you can see account-wide environment variables, which you can access through your account settings under environment variables and set anything that applies to multiple projects. And so, but for this project specific, so for Shawnee, I'm going to add an environment variable that is named expo public example. And for people who aren't aware of what this prefix means, if you're going to use an environment variable inside of your JavaScript code in your Expo app, you need to prefix it with expo public because that's how we communicate and make it very clear at the time of you using it that like this is a public value. This is going to be inlined into your JavaScript code. And that's really important for people to understand because it's a common misconception that if you put something in an environment variable, it's somehow secure. And that's just not the case at all. It's if you put something in an environment variable and it's used inside of your Expo React Native app, like it is just literally there inside of the JavaScript, and it is trivial to extract that value if you want it. So hello, live stream. Let's put that in here. We can choose from different types. This basically plain text will just allow us to see really clearly on the website the value of this. Sensitive will put it behind some asterisks like this, but you can still reveal it. So if you just don't want to like have the value always just hanging out there, it's like, you know, like putting some clothes on it to have some modesty. Secret is like you cannot download this afterwards. It's only loaded through when you run like a job on workflows or ES build. Then we'll download it for the worker. We'll decrypt it. It'll be available during the life cycle of that worker, and then it will go away again and be stored in an encrypted format. So, okay, so I'm adding this environment variable X public example, and I'm going to run ES update environment. In this case, I've associated it with multiple environments. You could pick different environments and have different variants of this value for different environments, but I'm just going to say environment production here. Okay. Yeah. Get back here. Let's just add an example one here of like a sensitive, just so people can see. You can also add files if you want. So if you have a Google services file or something like that, that's a good way to accomplish that. So for sensitive, you can see you can reveal that here, or copy the value to your clipboard. It's just obfuscated by default. So
are those obfuscated in the builds too?
That's right. In your build logs, okay, it will be obfuscated. And again, it's not, you shouldn't treat that as like, this is a value that is going to therefore be safe to embed in your app because it's somehow obfuscated. It's just, if you have some value that for whatever reason, you just want to not have revealed by default in the UI, and you want it to be obfuscated in the logs, you can put it here. So it could be that maybe it's something that's a secret, but you want to be able to still download it afterwards. So it's a sensitive value. You're not embedding it in your app, but like you can still download it from here. Like if this was a file type, we could click in and download if it was sensitive, but if it's a secret, we can't download the file again. So it just depends. It's to give you these levels of control for like what works for you. If you're very concerned that people will be able to download a certain type of thing or read a value afterwards, then secret is the way to go. Otherwise, if it's like, well, I have my Google services file, but I'm okay with everyone on my team being able to download that. They have access to the Google account anyways, the Firebase account, or whatever, Google Cloud account. So that's fine. If people can download that, then you just mark it as sensitive. And so it just gives you more control as an organization or as a team for how you want to treat the different values. But you can see now that I published it like this, we see hello live stream. So there we go. So if we wanted to configure that for our build as well, it'll actually by default use the production environment here. So this value will be that by default. But if we wanted to use, if for some reason we wanted production to point to the preview environment, we could do that as well. And yeah, and that'll just pull in all those values. So if we run, let's just simplify this a bit so I don't get prompted for credentials. So you can see now it is loaded environment variables with visibility, plain text, and sensitive loaded from the production environment on ES servers, expo public example, sensitive example. So these were both downloaded and loaded and used to evaluate the app config and will be used on ES servers as well for this. So yeah, that's basically how this stuff works. One other thing that Keith mentioned was the ability to kind of download things as well. So I can run ES-env pull. So if I'm on another machine and I want to be able to get my environment set up in the same way as it would be if I ran ES update with a given environment flag or build, then I can run ES-env pull and it'll pull things into .env.local from the environment on EAS. As you can see, we do not pull secret values. Like I said, these can't be downloaded after they've been set. They can't be changed. You can only delete them. So that's expected. But that's just something for you to factor in. Maybe you'll want to set any values like this locally in your local .env or something like that if they're required for your use case.
Cool. That's oh man, what was that? Oh yeah, I was just thinking of, because it downloads with the env.local, which is typically meant for literally things that you've just set in your local environment after you've downloaded your repo. If you have been using env files for putting expo public variables in, or if you've been using them with a different environment system so far, like it shouldn't clobber any other env files that you're using. And I think that's actually an important point in general, is that like your existing EAS secrets have been migrated over to environment variable secrets, and should continue to work, as well as like the variables inside your EAS JSON profile, will continue to work. So you shouldn't see any changes until you start opting in. So you start moving your environment variables over to this. It's not going to break your existing measures that you've already taken for your environment. Cool. We had a couple questions that I thought were interesting, kind of relating to the env files. Yara Kook was asking when env.staging, et cetera, will be supported. I think there's an interesting discussion there, because this system is, I think in a lot of ways, meant to replace having all these different env files, because you can pull whatever environment, whether it's development, preview, or production, from the cloud when you need it. And then it's kind of just in scope until you need to pull a different environment.
Yeah, I responded in the chat, but kind of like basically the same thing you said, Keith. Like the .env.name files depend on the process env node env value. And so yeah, in general, that's not something I personally recommend. I don't think it's so useful outside of the server context. And so, like Keith said, you can use env pull and use env local. And then when you pull an env, you select development, preview, or production, and then you'll pull those values, and then you're using that configuration. So looks like Just Patrick asked what happens to the values that don't have expo public prefix. That's up to you, right? Like we don't embed them in the bundle or anything. If you want to use something like direnv to load your .env files into your environment, then which we really like doing, you can just source the .env, and then when you cd into your project directory, it'll load those into your shell environment, and then you can use them for whatever you like. In the case of ES build, the values that you set on environment variables there, those are just always loaded into the environment. I think an important distinction there is like the way that we load environment variables for Expo apps is when you run the Expo dev server, it will then load the .env files, and it will surface the Expo public configuration. But if there's anything that isn't prefixed with Expo public in that context that you want to use to control something, like, for example, on ES build, you set an NPM token. Like you don't want your NPM token to be embedded in your app bundle, right? Like that would be bad. But you would like the NPM token to be available for your NPM RC. So on ES build, that's loaded into the environment, and then it can be read into the NPM RC. And similarly, if you use something like direnv to source your M files when you cd into the directory, and then configure NPM RC there to read that NPM token value, then that'll work. And so we'll probably provide a bit more guidance on using tools like direnv for those cases, but that sort of behavior is automatic on ES builds.
I think that kind of relates to Just Patrick's other question about, what's the difference if the variables are all inlined in your source anyway, and secrets are, I kind of like to call it like build time versus runtime variables. If the variable is in code, or even technically like binary code or compiled code, when the user is running it, the user could technically get it by hook or by crook. But if it's only used during your build, and I think that Shimon brought up the kind of the quintessential example in my mind, which is the private key to upload your Sentry source maps. If you're using Sentry for debugging, like that is only used during the build process. So you can put that in as a secret or a sensitive variable, and no user is going to see that because it never gets compiled in your app. It's just used in the process of compiling your app. All right, awesome. Environment variables are cool. I like them. I look forward to using them a lot. We have Tomasz now to talk about some early preview kind of experimental developments with using Swift UI inside the Expo Modules API. So I'll let you take it away.
Yeah. So one of the things in Expo SDK 52 that we didn't announce yet is our integration with Swift UI. So in this SDK, we are able to easily embed Swift UI views into your React Native apps with a very convenient way. Maybe I can share my screen and show my tweet or post, actually. Oh, 1 second.
I've got it handy if it's, there we go. Nice.
Yeah, so this is my post when I show like a quick demo of a new component that we are going to add to this SDK. It's basically a mesh gradient component. So this demo also shows the integration with gesture handler and animated. So I can also show you some like simple code here in the PR.
Can we get a zoom on that?
On this one.
Text size, get in there. Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, so basically this is our module. It's very simple, and like with other, like with UI kit views, we are specifying all the props here inside the view component in the module definition. But now in Swift UI, we are just making a new structure like this with all the props specified here, just like records. And here we are just writing a struct that is like exactly a Swift UI view with the body that returns Swift UI components. And here is our component in Swift UI. And so basically, like all the changes inside the props are automatically calling like the body again, and it updates our views. Yeah, so I'm very excited about this because there are so many views in Swift UI that are not available in in UIKit. So it gives us a lot of more possibilities to use some nice views and animations from Swift UI. Yeah.
Awesome.
There are, of course, some limitations in that, because so far we can only render like a leaf in our React view hierarchy. So basically, we can only embed like a single, maybe not a Swift UI view, because you can put a lot of them, but you can't actually put React children inside. But we are working on this, so in the future we'll be able to mix like UIKit and Swift UI views inside. So, for example, we could like build something that's like with the mesh gradient, for example, we could make it like a mask on other views. That would be pretty cool. Yeah, I think that's
very nice. Yeah, after I was experimenting with Swift UI because I think you have to use it for widgets. At least I couldn't figure out a way to not use Swift UI for widget, and I was like, oh, I'm getting used to it. This is the the modern way of writing native view code, and then like having to juggle like 2 different view systems, especially when you're as a React Native developer, you're trying to do as much as you can in JavaScript. You're trying to drop down the native when you need to add some new capability. So having access to the whole toolbox of UI capabilities in iOS sounds pretty cool, especially when it does crazy wavy rainbow things like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Also, many people were asking about like, what about Android? So on Android, we are also looking into supporting Jetpack Compose, which is like a competitor to SwiftUI, basically. So hopefully, yeah, we'll make it soon.
Very nice. Checking real quick if anybody has any questions. And once again, if you have questions about anything, since it is an AMA, feel free to stick in the chat. We'll probably be circling back to some things. So if you have a question about SwiftUI, type it in really quick and we'll answer it right now. But if you have a question about SwiftUI in Expo Modules API and it comes up later, we might just circle back to that and bring Tomasz back here to answer the question. That reminds me that before we head over to our next topic, we did have a couple like interesting questions about environment variables coming in that we kind of addressed in chat, but I thought they were kind of cool to bring up on here. Pro Fitness Shorts asked, is it possible to set role-based access to the ENV from the cloud? Like, for example, certain of the members of the team won't be allowed to pull prod ENV, but maybe can have access to dev and staging. So I think not yet, but that's where the secret value could come in if you do have a set of configuration that you do want to hide entirely, except from a restricted group, where it technically hides from everybody. You could still use the secret and use exclusively secrets, for instance, on production. But yeah, I'm not sure if anybody else has any comments on any strategies around that. I think it also depends on like, are you're not going to really want to hide like your API URL. That's not going to be sensitive. You're probably going to want to hide a smaller group of items that are actually sensitive. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on strategies for that.
Yeah, one caveat that comes to mind is if you have secret environment variables, no one on your team can see them. But I'm pretty sure that like if you really didn't want someone on your team to see them for some reason, they might be able to like stringify or print those out in logs somewhere. Is that possible? Like if it's really, really important that like an intern or I don't know, a new employee or something can't see like your Sentry auth token, then like the secret is not going to provide that since it's running at build time, and someone could theoretically run something on our servers that would print that out.
Yeah, it's the same sort of guarantee you get from any CI/CD provider on GitHub Actions. Any secret can still during build you have access to arbitrary compute and the value is present in that environment. And so it's a little more auditable in that case because you could see, oh, someone snuck in some code to do something with this value. But this isn't a unique thing to the case of ES Build. And I would say if there's that much concern, maybe don't employ the person, or maybe don't. Maybe don't let them run builds, or have a more controlled environment for running builds where those are present, and just like don't let anyone run a build in a production environment except for certain users.
That's a really good distinction about like the limitations of a secret, which, as you mentioned, like that would apply to any CI/CD system. Like if you can write an arbitrary command that prints something, you can print the secret because the secret is going to be used as plain text somewhere at some point in that build process, even if you can't see it in the logs. Cool. And then there was one other, Brent answered Yariu's question about production versus development ENV. And I just thought it was an interesting distinction to bring up. Like when you talk about like the like env.production, that refers actually very specifically in like Node env parlance, at least as I understand it, to like a production web server. So when you're building a mobile app or you're publishing an update, you're never running on a production web server. Like it's actually process env, and almost the whole workflow on EAS build will return dev or development, or I forget exactly what the string is, but like running on EAS build is basically like a development environment as far as these processes are concerned, because it's production. Now, like really production, there's not really Node running anymore in your web app. It's running on the the JavaScript engine or whatever. But it's kind of a difference between like mobile app building and web development production. So that's why Brent and everybody else recommends staying away from those prefixes or suffixes or whatever you call that. It's in the middle, I guess, kind of. And sticking to.
I think it's at the end, Keith. I think it's a suffix.
Yeah, I think it is at the end. That's a suffix. Sorry. I thought there was something after it. Directions are hard. All right. There was an interesting question possibly about, I don't know where this one was coming from, but it was about adding a share extension to iOS being the same as adding a widget. So I guess the context would be like in Apple targets, there's everything is a target or like this companion separate bundle, like whether it's a share extension, a widget, a watchOS app, or whatever, and those all tend to use Swift UI. So I'm guessing asking about like potentially sharing Swift UI between an Expo module in the future and an extension. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, so I already responded in the chat as well, but so I'm not very familiar with shared extensions on iOS, but I believe it's not like the same as widgets, and it doesn't require us to use Swift UI. So I may have to take a look at that, but that's what I think. And also being able to write extensions, widgets, it's still not really possible, even though we have support for Swift UI, because basically in case of widgets, then everything, like all the views have to be in Swift UI, which is right now not supported by React Native itself. So this is still kind of limitation.
Yeah, and to be clear, when you do a widget, which you can ship a widget with your React Native app, you're actually shipping like completely separate, isolated Swift UI code files.
Yep.
All right. So we're going to talk about, I'm sorry, we missed. Brent was going to talk about new architecture, and I actually skipped right past it and went straight to the Swift UI. So that's good because we gave Brent a little bit of a break. Brent, do you have some stuff to show us or tell us about new architecture? New architecture, of course, is the default in Expo SDK 52. Of course, you can migrate independently from SDK 50 whatever to 52, and then turn on new architecture after that. But this is really the point that we've been recommending everybody give a try. Make a branch in your code, see if new architecture is working for you. A lot of the packages, the mainstream packages, support it. Brent, I'll let you take it away. New architecture.
Yeah, just to clarify the default status. So it is enabled by default in new projects.
That's right.
So,
sorry.
Let's just share my screen again. All right. So if I were to create a new project, actually don't use button often, but let's try this. Create Expo app. There we go. Button is pretty quick, so seems like a good choice. All right, cool. So if we look at the app JSON here, which I think is hopefully visible to people, you can see this new arc or new arch. There's no correct pronunciation. We'll get into this later with SQL and SQL, but similar.
Say it fast enough. It's just the location in New Jersey.
I'm not American, so I don't understand it, but I believe you. So new arc enabled is set to true by default in new projects. But if this is not set at all, then it still defaults to being false in SDK 52. So when you upgrade your project, it will not be automatically enabled. The only exception to that is in Expo Go. Expo Go always has the new architecture enabled, starting with SDK 52. And so something you'll see here as well is I deleted the new arc enabled field. And So it's booted up with the new architecture anyways, because this is an Expo Go. And then it says here, as a warning, React Native's new architecture is always enabled in Expo Go, but it's not explicitly enabled in your project app config. So this could lead to unexpected behavior when you create a production or development build. And that's because the default and only option to use in Expo Go, right, is new architecture enabled. But if you haven't set that in your app config and then you go and create a build, then that will use the current default value when it's unspecified, which is false. So you get that warning, and it just basically tells you, go back, I don't know that running still, and add that value to your app.json, and then it will be it'll be good. It'll be safe to do that. That said, it's a good opportunity here to maybe clarify some details about Expo Go usage. So over time, like, I think people who've been around the Expo ecosystem for a while have seen sort of an evolution of what this app is for. And so it used to be called Exponent Client, and then Expo Client, and then we got to a point where what we really thought everyone should be using for building apps was development builds. And we wanted to emphasize that this particular app is just a sandbox environment. It's good for getting started. It's good for getting you going, right? It's a simple thing. There's a trend at the time of using Go as, what is it, Keith? The prefix is something. I don't know. That's just a qualifier. It's just like a second part of the name. Okay, language nerds, tell me what it is in the comments. So Expo Go supported use case and suggested usage. What we recommend Expo Go for is for first-time Expo developers. So you're just getting started. You don't have any native tooling like Xcode or Android Studio installed. You just want to be like, what is this thing? Maybe I'm a web developer. Maybe I've just never done any development before. Maybe you wrote Pascal back in the 80s and now you're trying out mobile development. Who knows? This would be a good fit for you, just to see what it's about, play with it a little bit, and not have to mess around too much with all of this other tooling. But then another cohort that we think it's really useful for is for experienced developers that want to quickly try out ideas. So I've been at Expo for 9 years as of a couple of days ago, and I still use Expo Go often just to like create a project really quickly and like import some package in the Expo SDK and experiment with it. I think that's really, really useful. And so it's the quickest way to get going with that. That said, it's not that much slower to go to expo.new these days and create a new development build. So I'm not sure if you all have seen this, but we launched it back in May. And so you can kind of just go here, fill this out, and live stream. SDK 52, sure, and press continue. And then what it'll do is basically guide you through creating a development build. In this case, I can choose, do I want to target device, simulator, whatever. And then it'll give me a command to run locally with ESCLI, and it'll take about a minute or a minute and a half to actually create that development build and get running. That's great, but it doesn't necessarily include, like, I mean, we have so many packages in the Expo SDK, and so you'd still need to, like, that just includes the stuff that you get in a default project here. So whatever is in your package JSON here, pretty good selection of things to allow you to play with. But if like what you really wanted was, oh, I just want to play with expo-video, then you'll, like, I would use Expo Go for that often. Just quickly spin that up. So these two sort of use cases are what we have in mind. And what we've noticed actually in updating to SDK 52 is that a lot of people are still using Expo Go for production, a production environment, or rather a development environment for their production apps. And so we've heard some people saying, oh, well, I'm forced to upgrade to SDK 52 because Expo Go updated to SDK 52. There are a few things about that. One is, for any platform aside from a physical iOS device, you can always install any version of Expo Go that'll run on that device. or you can install an old simulator, whatever. So we have pretty good level of support here for that. Like if I wanted to say, okay, I need to get this for my iOS device. Yeah, so that is correct. If I wanted to get this for my Android device, it gives me instructions. I can install it with Orbit. I can scan this QR code, whatever. It's very easy. The whole idea was make that as easy as possible. So that's the first thing that about like being forced to upgrade that's not quite right. And the second thing is you can just create a development build, right? Like with your current environment, if you have your build running, if you're releasing to production already from your app, then like if you run a development build, it's just going to work, and it's pretty straightforward to do it. We have a really great tutorial that Aman put together here for learning. Oops, I'm in the wrong section. Learning how EAS works, and the first thing that is explained here along with a video. So regardless of how you like to consume your content, feel free to even not watch the video and listen to it, so you have a purely auditory experience if that's your thing. And it walks you through how to create a development build. It will not take you a long time, and then you're good to go. So yeah, I just wanted like a little bit of a tangent here, but just something to keep in mind. Other thing related to upgrading really quickly is Keith put together this really good guide that I can't find now by you, but there we go, troubleshooting. That's the one. That explains if you're having issues, what to do. And one of the first things mentioned is migrate to development builds if you're still using Expo Go for development. And that'll just help you get to a spot where, like, if you feel like, oh no, I'm being made to update and maybe the new architecture isn't working for me, there's a tie into the new architecture here. Then you can always just move over to a development build and stay on SDK 51 until you're comfortable with migrating over. And honestly, you'll be in a much better spot for it. Like anyone who migrates to development builds, sure, you lose the ability to just have someone download the app from the store and launch your thing really quickly. But there's so many other things that you get from it, like being able to change literally anything about you're actually doing real development. You're no longer using training wheels. So just think of Expo Go as kind of like training wheels, or like the tutorial level in a video game. And once you want to move on from that, we're definitely there. Let us know if you have any issues in migrating. Anyhow,
we've joked about different names for that, like Expo Start or Expo Appetizer. Or I'm trying to think of some of the other ones to emphasize that it's for getting a taste. Yeah. Or as I often like to think about it, like Expo Go is kind of like for sharing with friends. I like using it in workshops because I could do some basic stuff and have everybody running, and I don't have to make any assumptions about their development environment. As long as they show up with a computer that runs Node, you're good.
Yeah.
One cool thing about development builds too that you can do is since you need to like install a profile on someone's phone, which is pretty quick to do, it also serves as like very lo-fi authentication as well. So like if you want to share some previews just with certain people, it's pretty easy to just be like, here, give me your phone, let me install the profile. And then you can use native modules and all of that. It's kind of neat.
Yeah, and what John's referring to there is internal distribution, which on iOS would involve registering a device so that you can share it with the other device. Okay, so a bit of a tangent, but I think something that we can like quickly go over here is what it looks like to enable the new architecture in an app that is like, it's not trivial, but like not super complicated. It kind of resembles in lots of ways the default project, but has a few other dependencies, like gifted shards, auto size text. So I'm going to demonstrate some of the annoying things about upgrading the Expo and React Native version here as well. So if I like this project, as we saw, right, SDK 50, that's fine, it's recent-ish. So I'm gonna do SDK 52. Sure, let's do fix. Okay, so we're probably gonna have problems here. And this is the culprit. So within the React Native Babel preset and this set of dependencies, You'll often find that with Yarn v1, Yarn Classic, like it just kind of hangs here, and then eventually the JavaScript heap size limit is reached, and it stops working and just crashes. Unfortunately, this is just an issue with Yarn as far as we know, and honestly, the ecosystem has kind of moved on from Yarn in lots of ways, or rather Yarn v1, and now they're up to v4. And I think it might be time for us to move on from that as well. So we've documented this under known issues, and you see JavaScript heap out of memory, and there are some workarounds, but it's a little frustrating. And so it might be something to consider. Maybe you could move to a more recent version of NPM, trade your problems for another set of problems, or use a more recent version of Yarn. Up to you. Package managers are they're great, but there's always issues that you'll encounter with.
I'm thinking back in time to like me 5 years ago, and you telling me to not use Expo Go or Yarn v1. I'd be like, you will pry Expo Go and Yarn v1 away from my cold dead hands. But you're right. There is bigger, better, greater things on the
there we go. So I got that. So I'm gonna update this by just going here and just setting it. I don't know whatever we set to this, the same thing. So I'm just gonna update it to SDK52 there, and did I delete? Let's just delete the yarn lock. I know, terrible dimension here. Do that. It doesn't matter for this project. Obviously, if you have a monorepo with a bunch of different projects and packages in it, that is very scary, and you probably want to try avoiding that. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and do that because it's straightforward. So that'll bump the Expo package version and allow us to work around this JavaScript heap Yarn v1 issue. And now I can run expo install fix to bump all of the other dependencies. Let's do the usual thing here. How are we looking? All right, we don't know if this is supported by the new architecture yet, but let's give it a shot. So we can run this in Expo Go, I believe. Let's give it a try, see what happens. Yeah, don't worry about that. That's another asset. Oh, okay, so we crashed immediately. Expo SQLite next doesn't exist. So not an ideal way to crash, but let's just fix that. We can look for Expo SQLite next, which if you look at our release notes, actually, was that in our previous release? Yeah, we actually removed that in the last release, my bad. So that was an SDK51. So this one was on SDK50. So let's just replace this with Expo SQLite. We use the next namespace when we're rolling out a package to replace an existing implementation in order to get some time for people to try it out, experiment with it, while still leaving the other implementation in place. And then once we feel that it's stable, then we'll migrate that to the root package. So Expo SQLite next became Expo SQLite. And then for the period of an SDK release, we had Expo SQLite Legacy. So people could continue to opt into the old implementation for a release. But there's so many nice things, and we can talk about Expo SQLite later. There's so many nice things about this that there's no reason to use the legacy, and so we removed it for this version.
I feel like we should have a live stream where Brent just upgrades everybody who shows up their app to the new architecture.
That'd be fun, actually. All right, so it just worked, right? This is using the new architecture in Expo Go. We did get a warning here, the warning that we talked about before, so we can make sure it's the key project here. There we go, budget buddy, JSON. If you're not using VS Code Expo for autocomplete, then yeah, I pity you in having to remember these things and refer to a table on the website. It's really great. It'll validate and autocomplete and everything. So you can see all that we can do. So I've added that so that I won't get this warning. And there we go. It works. So I mean, not everything is going to be so seamless. Obviously, there was some discussion in the chat before about like updating certain modules not working. But for libraries that use anything that like any of the most popular libraries out there, we've spent a lot of time. We looked at the download stats on ESBuild for the top 500 packages. We followed up on all of those repos, and the vast majority of them, like there were only very few exceptions where we weren't able to get those upgraded. And typically those were cases where they were libraries maintained by a company who wasn't responsive to us, and we couldn't exactly coerce them into doing anything. So I think now that this is like rolled out as a more standard thing in default, we're hoping that, and we have seen that a lot of companies are now like, oh, okay, I need to actually make my library support the new architecture, and they're doing that. So like some people were saying in the chat, like, oh, there's maybe a library that is like a little more niche, like there was, I think, React Native Health Kit, I think it was, that was mentioned. That one, yeah, I think it has like 30,000 weekly downloads on NPM, which is not nothing, but it's far outside of even like the most popular 1,000 libraries for React Native. And as you can imagine, a smaller team of people between Expo and Meta who are following up with all of these things, we can't chase down thousands of libraries. It was enough to go through the list of 500 and some of the others that came up that were outside of that, and we thought were important to address. So yeah, that's kind of the state of the new architecture here. I can run a build and it'll just work for iOS or Android. I mean, yeah, that's this. We also had a previous live stream, if you're curious to see, where we did Single Origin 2, which is an app from John for brewing coffee, and Word Check, which is another app from John for Scrabble word checking, in which that live stream we got into some discussion about words that should be illegal in Scrabble. And I think one that should be illegal, to repeat it here, is the word za, which is an abbreviation for pizza, which is apparently acceptable in Scrabble. There's a lot of two-letter words. If you learn those, everyone you play Scrabble with, if they're good, they'll be like, yeah, that's fine. If they're mediocre players to bad players like me, they'll hate you because it feels like you're cheating by just having all these nonsense two-letter words. So that's my Scrabble
Please
tip.
give us a shout out in the chat if you've ever referred to pizza as
I think I have, actually.
Also, if you want another tip, just get your opponent to say that they agree to use the Collins dictionary, which is the one they use outside of the US and Canada for the rest of the world. It's got like thousands more words in it, so you're a lot more likely to get a hit.
Stay tuned for our next live stream, which is in-depth Scrabble strategies with John.
We're just gonna play Scrabble next time.
The U is probably a lot more valuable in that context. Also, you can inject into lots of words like color, and there you go.
Ooh, color.
Just it's still pronounced color.
I think the health kit example actually is an interesting use case of where like these different improvements and advancements kind of collide in ways you don't expect, in a good way. And I'm not saying like go rewrite, write your own version of every library that's out there, but Expo Modules API brings you much closer to, if you were to go to like implement, health kit functionality inside your app, it brings you much closer to like reading a straight up tutorial of how you would do it in a native iOS app. Because you can pretty much just paste that, Swift code in and, do the necessary wiring up to get the output, and that API shows up in your app. So as someone who used to use a lot of the HealthKit API, often you're using like some subset. You're like trying to read a particular value, or like you're at a biking app and you want to read biking data. You're often not using the whole thing. So there is always the option to go grab that native code, use npx create expo module -- local, which gives you a little folder where you can stick native code in and have it show up in your JavaScript after you make a development build, and go to town that way. Cool. We have before we get on to some other subjects, we have a couple questions in the chat. I know Tomasz is itching to answer those. But before Tomasz even answers those, I wanted to iterate that, this is an AMA. So the questions aren't just restricted to what we're talking about here. If you have questions about anything about using Expo, but also like Expo as a company, the people who work at Expo. Does Brent like pineapple pizza? It's all fair in a game. It's an AMA. So hit us with your questions. That's why we made this one a little bit longer, because we definitely want to answer as many questions as we can.
Cool.
So yeah, let's head over to a couple questions here. Let me see if I can find these ones here. The one was about, will future Expo versions make it easier to implement Android and iOS widgets, from Vladimir?
Yeah, so sadly, as I said before, it's not currently possible with React Native to build like widgets on both iOS and Android using React, but you can do that natively in Swift and Kotlin, and then Expo can help you with a config plugin to link it with the rest of the app. And you can also write Expo module to communicate between the widget and the app. But of course, we are looking into it, but right now, I think it's not doable. One good thing is that the new architecture gives me some hopes about that, because it would be easier to implement something like this with the new architecture, for sure.
I think an important thing that you mentioned there that could get lost in the sentence is it's not possible with React. So you can build anything you want in a React Native app. The UI for a widget would be something that you would just build it in Swift UI, and then you would be able to bridge that to your React Native app. So like, it's not going to get in the way. You could do that in any Expo project today. People do it. It exists. It's out there. You just wouldn't write that part of your app using JavaScript.
One interesting nuance of that is I think the preeminent package for adding an Android widget to a React Native app, React Native Android widget, actually does technically sort of let you write React, but it's a limited syntax. And I think at a high level, what it's doing behind the scenes is it's letting you use certain components inside JSX, and then it's kind of like taking it, like rearranging those and posting like a screenshot of the different components in like whatever container they need to be, whether it's like a static container or a scroll view. And that's how you're able to actually like define it in your JavaScript technically and have limited interaction with your JavaScript. But number one, that only works on Android. Number two, it does not work with arbitrary or even technically a subset of the actual like building blocks that you use in your React Native app itself. And I think that also like illustrates like widgets are so different between the two platforms. One key challenge to overcome before it like would be desirable, if at all possible, to write JSX to create widgets, would be to have like a pipeline that actually works for both and make sure the widgets show up both ways on both platforms, and also adapt to the capabilities of widgets are different on each platform. Android widgets can scroll. I don't think, maybe iOS ones can, but I know they can do like different things. They have different touch areas that are eligible for what you can do with them. If you can't tell, I did a couple workshops this year at App.js and Chain React about making widgets. There's one more question Tomasz wanted to get to. It was about React Native Web View and DOM components. Here we go.
Yeah, so for DOM components, we had to build our own version of WebView, basically, because of like to implement some features of DOM components. So we don't use React Native WebView for them. But if we like see that the WebView that we wrote for DOM components is stable enough, then maybe we can expose that.
Cool.
I think some clarification there is
okay.
we did write our own WebView, but we're currently also using React Native WebView by default. And I think, yeah, it would be nice. I mean, it's to be determined how things will proceed there. There are definitely some issues that have come up around React Native WebView that have forced us. We actually had to roll back from 0.4 of the latest release to 0.2 because of a regression in WebView that impacted DOM components. But yeah, we'll see how things proceed there. Ultimately, like a lot of the features of React Native Web View might not be needed for DOM components, and so it might make sense for us to just have our web view that has the features that are specifically oriented for what we need for DOM components and handles all of that really well and in a stable, reliable way that doesn't maybe get impacted by other features and other changes. And so we'll see how that proceeds. But yeah, we're definitely paying attention to the React Native Web View repo and making sure that we're staying on top of that and in touch with the maintainers.
Cool. Dinesh had a question that is actually a good segue into our next section, asking about some changes to splash screen. And Brent is going to explain those. And I'm not sure if you want, so I upgraded my app to the new splash screen and I want to show it off to show how nice it is.
Do it.
All right, let's do it. Give me a second here. All right, sharing. Can you guys see my app?
We can see it.
Awesome. All right. So yeah, the new splash screen in SDK52 is better, and it implements the Android 12 API. If you recall, with the previous version that didn't do that, Android made some big changes. And if I open my SDK51 app here, it might be hard to see on live stream, but you might see that little like pop in there where it like changed sizes. This is my little app for learning katakana when I went to Japan. It's not very comprehensive, but if you want to download my app and boost my numbers from like 5 to 10, just look up just some kana on the App Store. But yeah, you can see that little jump there, and that kind of just like flashes in. I implemented on the splash screen API last night, and SDK52 is looking much, much better. Oops, it was already open. Let's close it there. No pop. Also, that nice little fade in there looks so good. And then too, I was like, oh man, I just got to do it on iOS as well. It looks great on iOS as well, doing the nice little fade in there too. So yeah, we have this new splash screen API. Yeah, Brent, like what went into that?
Well, it's pretty tricky to make a change around splash screen because it is something that every app uses in some sense. We've actually made a few improvements around that. So ultimately, like we investigated this for a while, and I think it took us too long ultimately to like ship this improvement. We're really stoked that it's there now, but definitely in the future we have a more stable foundation to build off of. But what happened was with Android 12, there was a new splash screen API released, and so people using Android 12 and greater would have seen like what Keith just showed you there in the SDK51 version of his app, which would be like your app icon first, and then your splash screen, and then the app. And so what's actually happening there is that the splash screen, that's not really like the native splash screen there. That's like our mimicked view of a splash screen. And the splash screen that's being used is just like your app icon. And it doesn't look great. And what we tried to do initially in our first pass here was we thought, okay, well, what if we like perfectly reproduce the splash screen that that Android presents, so that like you can set this initial splash screen, and then we have a view that mimics the exact behavior, so that we're able to display that as this transition. Because for people who aren't familiar, like there's like static definition of like these splash screens on iOS and Android that is just shown immediately once you boot the app. And then a lot of times what people do, and like what we do in Expo Splash Screen elsewhere, is we'll display a native view that looks identical or close to identical to that splash screen and keep that visible for a while, and then hide it once we're ready to do that. And so we tried to like recreate that perfectly, and it was going to be a lot of maintenance work, and there would always be some kind of edge cases. So in my opinion, like maybe we could get there one day, but it was kind of getting in the way of us being able to move forward with this. And my perspective on this is like, if you're going to be slightly incorrect in some cases, that's often worse than just not trying to emulate it at all. Like, just get. I mean, that's obviously not a generally applicable principle, but in some circumstances, I think that that's really true. And I think it's really frustrating if you like build a splash screen in a certain way, and then it turns out that like when that's displayed by the native splash screen, and then our view that mimics it is like not exactly the same, and there's no way to adjust that. That would be extremely frustrating. So we decided we're not really going to take that approach, and instead we're just like sticking with the native splash screen that is provided, and following all of those rules exactly as given here. And so you can look and see, like in our docs, we link to Android splash screen docs that explain how the splash screen works on Android 12 Plus. So there's very specific requirements about what size it needs to be, what you should use for it. It'll be clipped if it exceeds a certain size boundary. And so, yeah, you can just add this there. But one of the changes here that I think surprised people is previously you could have like your icon on the initial screen, and like in the SDK 51 version, maybe you see a flash of your icon, and then you see like a full screen splash screen. And oh, are we sharing the right screen here? I'm seeing Keith's.
Oh, I was trying to pull up the here. I'll go back to it. I was trying to pull up the doc that showed those standards for the icon, but
oh, sorry, maybe my
yet.
screen is not currently being shared. Dan, you want to switch that up?
Oh, let me share it. Yeah, let me stop sharing here.
Okay,
there you
go. Cool. Yeah, so this is what I was showing. That makes probably more sense now that I'm my screen is being shared. So it's all centered here. So what you might have seen is like maybe some people used full screen or larger images before, and so you would see like the icon on Android 12 Plus, and then it would switch really quickly over to like a larger splash screen or something that's incompatible with the native splash screen, and it would look kind of weird, and like you could still kind of emulate that today if you want. But the guidance that Android gives around this is your splash screen should look like this, and so we want to follow that. And so you might see that your splash screen, when you move over, is like, hey, this is being forced within a certain size, and like that's because that is what the Android splash screen API expects. And so we are using that API. We're not using the older version of it anymore. And so you might need to update your splash screen configuration accordingly. The fade that Keith showed was basically you could set the options so that we had some fade. That's a nice little useful thing there. We added dark mode support officially. It was there before. You could always add it through your own customization of your native project, but we built this into the config plugin now. And speaking of the config plugin, we're moving away from the splash field. So now you'll move to a config plugin for this. So what that will look like is like this instead. So Expo plugins, Expo splash screen, and then you can configure everything in there. You can still enable full screen on iOS by using this property, enable full screen image legacy. This will be set to true by default when you're using the splash key instead of the plugin for like compatibility reasons. But it's something we've indicated as legacy because we ultimately want to provide a more customizable splash screen API on iOS. And so likely what that will look like is it won't be splash screen, but you'll be able to specify different elements instead and give you full control rather than just a simple splash screen option, and allow you to implement some nicer like placeholder UIs, which of course you can still do today if you just run pre-built.
I appreciate that flag because like if you're really excited about this improvement, you might have been really focused on improving your Android splash screen experience. So you can leave your exact same iOS splash screen experience that you had already in place and first focus on fixing that little bit of that hitch and that little resizing thing that might have annoyed you for a while in Android, and then come back to the iOS side.
Yeah. One thing worth calling out here is so we can see in Expo Go that if we look at in VS Code here, this is the icon for the app, right? And this is the splash screen. So we're actually showing the app icon on this loading screen. And something that we've started to differentiate from now is in Dev Client and in Development Build and in Expo Go, there's a loading screen which is different from a splash screen. The splash screen is what you see when you launch the app natively, right? That's the splash screen. And then what we see here, that's a loading screen. And on these loading screens, we've started showing app icons instead. And there's still some work to do to clarify that. And we want to probably expose an API to allow you to customize that further. But this goes back to what I was saying about like mimicking the splash screen. There's a downside here in that like it's harder to preview your changes to the splash screen because you'll have to run pre-build or run a build on ES-Build. But you'll be sure that when you do, it's 100% accurate at least. And I think there's more tooling we can build on top of that. But we don't want to like create an impression that what you're seeing here is going to be reflective. Like that will limit us in our ability to allow you to build the best possible splash screen and ensure that like your changes are having the expected outcome. So yeah, those are the main things about splash screen, I think, that are worth calling out.
I love these like changes where you can like add like a little bit of configuration, or you don't even maybe change anything or barely anything, and you get this like your app like just feels that much nicer. It's like really like a no-brainer to stick it in there. I wanted to share like one real quick thing on my screen because I think there's like a cool thing that pairs with this pretty well. Maybe two little things. So I don't know if Dan, I'm going to share here and you can get me back up there. Number one, you guys can see my screen, right? I'm up there.
Yep.
Oh, cool. Number one, what was kind of fun, like, so I didn't expect this to work, but like, I started initially by just like, oh, I don't want to make another splash screen, like look at those documents. And I just like stuck my adaptive icon in there and like set it to like the width of like, I think that's the specification for the icon area inside the splash screen. And it just worked. Like, I was like, oh, cool. I barely did anything. So that was one cool thing. But the other thing, so, you know, thinking about changes that are like just enhance just the look and feel of your app in a subtle way and make it feel more cohesive as part of the operating system, just that extra native feel. I feel like the React Native edge-to-edge, the introduction of that, allowing edge-to-edge UIs in Android pairs really well with a splash screen. Like I feel like it's like Gruyere cheese and Pinot Noir because it's like two things that make your app feel much more at home in Android. And so after I did splash screen, I was so excited about that. I went and did edge-to-edge, and like this little thing is of course for like, it's for typing out if you're trying to like spell like words in katakana, if you see it on a sign. But you'll see here you had this black bar, and I was able to use, I think it's like Expo navigation bar or something like that, to like make it at least the same color as my background initially. But I could never actually like make it continuous with this. Like I even tried it, and it like was like off sync, and it was weird. But then I go to like my app now, and it's like using edge to edge. And I got that back, and it's like just like iOS. And so I'm really excited. And that was like no lines of code. All I had to do was add the library. There's a little component that lets you set the color of the system bars, as it calls at the top, the tray, and the status bar and the navigation bar. And then you just have to like make sure you remove like old stuff like the Expo status bar library and things like that, so it doesn't like reset the configuration. And then you've got this nice, and of course, fix any sizes that are off when you do this. But then you have this nice, immersive, wonderful looking, much more native app. So that was really exciting. I recommend checking out both of those. All right. We have some questions about splash screen. Shinagami is asking about animations, like the Gmail or Outlook app using Expo Splash Screen. I think we have an example where we use the animation in our Expo examples library, but
yeah, I think that's basically the same thing as before applies here. Like if basically you would not use the built-in fade animation, and instead what you would do is you would have your splash screen, then underneath that you would render your own version of that, and then you could animate that however you like. And so if your splash screen is literally just like a centered image that is 200 by 200, that should be pretty easy to recreate that in a React component, and then you can manipulate that with whatever you like in order to animate it out. This is typically what people do, and we also worked with Matthew or Zoontech from React Native Bootsplash, helping get a config plugin set up for that, so that works well with CNG, and he has some built-in stuff that even makes animations a little bit easier by trying to mimic the view for you automatically. So yeah, there's some interesting stuff there as well to look into.
Cool. Shinigami was also asking about, I think, not necessarily related to splash screen, but in general, Android GIF file support, or is it GIF? I don't know.
I think he's referring to splash screens.
For splash screen specifically. Okay.
Files. Yeah. I mean, we might look into that. I'm not really sure. I think Alan, if you're on the chat, maybe you can comment on that. But now that we have a better foundation for splash screen, we can start to look at what other more advanced features we might want to expose. But it's something to consider.
Neat.
I'm not sure GIF files are the best way to animate things though. So
yeah, I could see like the looping there causing
like a
weirdness.
Animated WebP might be a little better.
Yeah. I mean, the cool thing even about the current solution is like by fading into your like actual JavaScript view and having that smooth transition now, you could do stuff with like Skia if you wanted to. Really, like any animation you can do in React Native, you can do there. We have some questions coming back to Expo Modules API. Can you add native tests to your modules by Wookie FPV?
So I already answered that in the chat, but so we have a few modules with native unit tests on both iOS and Android, I think. So starting from the Expo modules core, it's pretty well tested. So it has like a lot of native unit tests. And as far as I remember, also Expo file system, Expo updates, and Expo clipboard all have set up for native unit tests. But I believe in most cases, you just need tests on the JS side because you write those tests only once instead of writing them natively for both platforms. So it might be just easier for most of use cases.
And as I recall, the Expo doc on the docs on the modules API, there is actually a section about mocking the native part of the native module, if I remember correctly. So you should have some good guidance there for writing JavaScript tests. Yeah, we got some questions. I think we covered these pretty thoroughly in the Expo Modules API live stream that we had. Was that a month ago or a few weeks ago, Tomasz? Time flies, but it wasn't that long ago. It was one of our last ones about performance and the different solutions for implementing native modules. So like a question about like just what is Expo Modules API doing that relates to performance and what kind of impact would you see in your app?
Yeah, so we are looking into the C++ and Swift interop as Nitro modules require, but I think it's, well, maybe I would start from that. It's not the thing that improves the performance, basically. And also it has some actually drawbacks, especially that enabling this interop in one library requires the entire app to be built with this interop, which means that the app will be compiled much slower because Xcode and the compiler, they generate a very large header with everything that you have in your application, including like all the Swift code and Objective-C one as well. So I noticed like very, very slow compilation times when I enabled this interop. And also worth noting that this interop is still experimental. So
just to add
Yeah, if
on,
you go-
like what Tomasz said about like the actual, so the benchmarks that are shared around this are like, they, I think, can be a little misleading in that unless your library is something that is doing like thousands of native method calls per second, you're not going to notice any difference in performance. And most libraries, like if you're building a library for, like we were talking about HealthKit earlier, I mean, maybe you do a native method call a couple times in a second occasionally, and we're talking like several orders of magnitude before that becomes anything that is noticeable. And so I think the trade-off that we're considering here is this would slow down builds, and for all but the most obscure of modules, would have no performance impact whatsoever, or at least nothing measurable that would actually impact the end user. So yeah, that's kind of.
And if you go back to the modules API live stream, Tomasz demonstrated some of the performance enhancements that were being used inside of new versions of the Expo modules that we published, and that were actually, are available in the Expo modules API for others to use, like reducing the number of times we load images from disk, or being able to access objects on the native side, while they're still in memory. From the JavaScript side. So when you talk about, say, you're displaying like hundreds of images or more in a list, and if you can reduce an instance where you're touching the disk as you're doing that, that's like a really big real world performance enhancement, and is likely at scale. You'll notice that dramatically versus being able to make a lot of individual calls. All righty, we have a question related to Expo image. Yurayuk was asking, are there any plans to allow specifying different image formats at the same time so that the first supported format is used? For example, like going from one, .avif back, falling back to WebP and then falling back to JPEG, I guess. I guess that this would be for like if certain image formats are supported on certain platforms. Would that be the scenario?
yeah, I feel like it's mostly the question about AVIF, which I think is not supported on some browsers and also on Android. I'm not sure, but well, this is an interesting idea. We didn't have any plans for that. I believe so far it's doable from the JS side to check like against the platform or the browser. So maybe it's not that necessary.
So if that is specifically for web code too, you could use like platform specific file extensions, to use use a web component for that image in the case and do a fallback that way, I suppose then, huh?
Yeah.
All righty. Let's Brent wants to show us a little bit of SQLite improvements. So Brent, you have the floor. What's new with SQLite, Expo SQLite, I should say.
So there are a few things that are pretty interesting here. We could start just at the top of the configuration. So we've added support for SQL Cipher, which was something that a number of people in the local first ecosystem were interested in, basically encrypting their SQLite database. So that's something you can just enable using a config plugin now. And something really fun that I'll demonstrate here as well is we wanted to use smooth reset project. Okay, so we have something easy to start with here. Let's just boot it up. We'll have not much to look at. Index. Import storage from expo SQLite /kb store. So this is a new API that we've provided, which is API compatible with React Native async storage. So if you're using React Native async storage anywhere, if you're at async storage from there we go. You can actually just swap that out for the storage API, but we've also added some useful sync methods here. So I can like storage set item, first item, hello world, right? And then maybe you don't want to put this inside of a render method, but just to demonstrate that you can. There we go. Oh, I'm pressing the wrong thing. Autocomplete button.
Can you make that a little bit bigger, Brent?
I can indeed.
Thank you.
I think this is just telling me the type might be a string. It's a little too big now. Sure. Okay. So we can see like we're actually setting an item synchronously here. We can call it sync as well. Way to make that explicit. And reading the value synchronously, which is pretty cool. That was, I think, a frustrating thing with, for people who've been around the React Native ecosystem for a while, we know that async storage used to be exported from React Native itself. And then it was split out into this other package. And I mean, just by fact of the name being async storage, it like felt maybe a little weird for it to start adding sync methods. So it's never had those. And that leads to some weird stuff. Like maybe on your app startup, you have some configuration around like, what is the current theme set to? Like, did you want to use dark theme to override your system configuration, whatever? And like having to do some use effect where you get some value async that state, and then you like down here maybe go like if data is loaded, right? Do something. Instead of doing that, you can just like get the value synchronously. And of course, there are other APIs for doing this. There are other key value storage APIs, and this is just, I think, nice because a lot of apps will use SQLite anyways for various things. And so just being able to have a simple key value store that you could drop in and potentially drop a dependency in your app by just removing async storage and replacing it. And ultimately, async storage uses SQLite on Android anyways. So this is the same sort of thing. So yeah, it's a nice little feature, I think, that I'll definitely be using in the future. And a bunch of work that we've done around this stuff is related to the live store post that went out yesterday that Beto recorded the video for. I've worked with Johannes Schickling on. We like to work with people who are building these really great tools, they're like next generation of tools, and then ensure that what we're building is something that will support their use case really well, and that it handles their demanding requirements. Like Johannes built some amazing stuff, and he likes to push things to the limit. Things like storing all of your UI state potentially in SQLite in your state management, so you can sync that across devices. And so we're just working with him to make sure that whatever we build here is going to work for demanding use cases. So yeah, those are a couple interesting things here about this. And yeah, I would say give it a try. Oh yeah, this other thing, we had this great contribution from the community to support sharing the database between apps, or have a good path for doing that. So you can store it in your shared app group database, which allows you, we were talking about extensions and widgets before, to be able to access the database between your widgets and your main app, or potentially even other apps entirely using that approach. There's a lot of features here. So if you haven't looked at Expo SQLite in a while, like definitely give it a shot. I really like this Drizzle Studio thing as well. A great way to explore your database. It's a nice library for, it's a DevTools plugin that allows you to just open an inspector, and we've got ORM integrations. Like it's really getting into a good spot where I think a lot of people can really benefit from leaning more on SQLite in their apps. So yeah, that's about all I wanted to demo with this.
Very nice. I got excited about thinking about like you got like authentication in your app and you need to like check if there was an auth token already there and being able to get it synchronously. And like I no longer have to make a loading state for that like 50 milliseconds where I just don't know if I have an auth token. And then my like logged in screen flashes on the screen and then it flashes back to a username password page. And oh, that's so much easier now. It's really nice. Let's see. We have some questions in here. I think Tomasz answered in chat, but I wanted to tell just Patrick about resources on building widgets, because if I say it on live stream, this will mean I have to get it done. I am planning on doing like a blog tutorial on like cross-platform widgets. If you ping me on Blue Sky, I already have the raw materials and I can send them to you. And I'll post them there too. Anybody else can look at my workshop code and see if they could do it. Let's see, we have a question about, I thought this was kind of fun, something completely different. My Track Studio was asking about what machine to get, a subject that all developers have opinions on. I want to build React Native apps using Expo. Will Mac Mini M4, 16 gigabyte RAM, 250 gigabyte SSD works? Will it be smooth without getting jest worker error? Opinions. I'm a little bit nervous about the 256 gigs because I'm thinking of like NPM yarn cache.
But that machine's like quite powerful. Like that's definitely going to be able to run apps without a problem. Like through the, yeah, you're going to be good with that machine. And then you can always attach an SSD or some other additional storage. And also that base model at the cost it's at, that's a good deal.
Yeah, that's true. That's like a really attractive base offering from Apple now. And I think it's a cool thing in general. Like, you know, there's, at this point, the base configuration that's out there for just about any computer, especially now that they're mostly all shipping with 16 gigs of RAM, is going to be able to like build, like at least you're going to be able to work on like one app at a time, where you might run into issues if you're trying to run like the Android emulator and the iOS simulator, or several of those at once, or build two apps at once, then you might run into some memory headroom issues. But I do like a lot of my free time development on a Windows computer with 16 gigs. It speaks to the power of development builds. It's an ARM-based computer, so it can't even run Android Studio, let alone an Android emulator. So I'm all development builds. So I'm just running Visual Studio Code, a Node environment, and using development builds. Not even that many development builds. Like I usually just build one and it takes care of me for at least the next 30 days or something. So it could have easily been done under the free plan. So it's very approachable to get started with just about whatever hardware you have, you know, unless it's like, I don't know, an Apple II GS or something like that.
Someone's running 4 simulators at a time on an M1. Yeah, they're crazy.
It's pretty impressive. Let's see here. Beto's asking about Tomasz. What's your favorite Mexican food?
Yeah, so of course, quesadilla.
Oh, nice. What do you want on your quesadilla? Is it like just cheese, or you got like a lot of stuff on it, inside of it, on top of it?
Yeah.
What is it?
So inside, like, and a lot of cheese. Cheese is the most important ingredient.
I always feel like steak is the best meat inside of a quesadilla. I don't know why that is, because I would actually prefer like pork on a fajita or burrito, but quesadilla, no, it's got to be steak.
You've now mentioned steak quesadillas, Gruyere, and wine. Like, yeah, we should hang out, man.
Other appetizers. I was thinking for a minute, like, what if like it was like Expo charcuterie board instead of Expo Go?
It must be lunchtime for you. Expo charcuterie boards next holiday season, everyone.
What kind of? I mean, I'm looking for some other questions here. Who's got another question here? But we're speaking about food. Like, what kind of food? I mean, like, you know, oftentimes we have lots of end of the year celebrations. What are folks looking forward to eating this time of year? Besides, like, let's think post turkey or Thanksgiving. Let's think like, but you could think Thanksgiving. What's your favorite side dish at Thanksgiving? That could be a valid answer too. Brent, your Thanksgiving was like a month ago, right? Like, don't they have a Canadian Thanksgiving?
It was, yeah.
How was
I can endorse Whole Foods pre-made Thanksgiving meal. You order it, they give you everything ready, you chuck it in the oven. It's like a pre-cooked turkey. You just heat it up again in the oven. Pretty good. It's worth it. If you want to save a lot of effort, go for it.
Nice. John Samp, you look like you like green bean casserole. Is it true?
No, that's not true at all. I'm from the Midwest in the US, so I want the carbs.
All right, let's. I think we did discuss this one before, but for Amre's sake, for the sake of completeness, we did mention there is dark mode support in the configuration for the new SDK 52 Expo splash screen. So you can add an icon and a whole background for dark mode. So we got you covered there. Let's see. Got a few minutes left here. What kind of other questions do we have? Oh, I like this one. Caddy, what's everyone's favorite Expo library? And feel free to answer in the chat as well. Tamasha's expo-video. Oh man, I love so many things. I mean, recency bias, I am smitten with splash screen now. It went way up my list when SDK 52 came out. I'm still getting used to it, but I feel like expo-audio is a dark horse contender. I know, Brent, you've been playing a little bit with expo-audio.
Yeah. How do you pick just one? I don't know. I like so many.
Brett loves all his children.
Yeah, I'm with Hassan here with Expo SQLite and Beto.
Yeah, SQLite is powerful.
Good. Router. I mean, yeah, splash screen, video, SQLite, audio, lots of cool stuff in there.
I don't think we mentioned that. Did you mention the Brent, the feature in Expo SQLite where it actually lets you like access the database, like it shares it between native code and JavaScript? Am I reading that right? I thought that was a new feature.
So the thing that I mentioned there was related to app groups and like being able to share
Okay, that's right. Yeah,
different apps with the shared container.
Yeah, that's a real powerful thing because that just makes if you look at like some of the workarounds for getting data to and from widgets, that's a little bit challenging, and a shared group Expo SQLite is really good for that. Expoza. We got some Expo router in the chat. Shinigami's got Expo camera. That's a great one. Expo camera added so many good new features in the last couple of versions as we moved over to the rewrite, the next version. Expo symbols, deep cut from Simac. Expo Palisa. Expo updates is amazing. I mean, I feel like Brent's been around Expo updates forever, but I feel like that was like one of the first things that drew me to writing Expo apps. I mean, I was using that like 8 years ago, and I was like, this is magic. I can't believe I can update an app. I think I actually didn't know how to deploy an app to the App Store like before I used Expo updates, because I was just testing it on Android devices and stuff like that. And I was like, oh man, I wish deployment was actually this easy when I got to it, that I could just push a button. Alrighty, I think we probably are getting wrapped up here. So yeah, thanks everyone for joining us on the live stream. Tomasz already claimed Expoza. That is amazing. Any last thoughts from anybody? You've released SDK 52 and workflows and all these other things. What are you going to do next? Go to Disneyland.
We have so many plans of things we're going to do next.
All right here. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. We have our next live stream, I think, on December 2nd. I hope I got that one right. Or December 3rd, I think is December 3rd is the Tuesday, right? It's a Tuesday after Thanksgiving break. I hope I got that right. But yeah, so we have a live stream with Vadim from Just Dev. So keep tuned into our live stream channel. If you need any more details about Expo SDK 52, go to expo.dev/changelog. You can read about everything in there. We talked about, remarkably, we did not talk about nearly everything or even most things inside that changelog. And I think it's expo-dev/launch-party, right? If you want to go check out all the announcements this week. Thanks, everybody. We'll catch you later.